Hello and welcome to another edition of Mortgage Solutions TV. I'm Adam Williams and joining me today is Charles Haresneb, Chairman of the Intermediary Mortgage Lenders Association. Welcome, Charles.
Thanks.
Now, research recently released by IMLA suggested that the majority of lenders are expecting a base rate increase in the first half of next year. Why do you think that is?
Well, I think the fundamentals of the economy are driving that, obviously, and we're seeing a fairly stable, good growth rate at the moment. So I don't think there's any emergency need to increase rates at the moment. I mean, we've seen over recent months some good growth in house prices, we've seen good growth in reductions in unemployment, which is all good news. But what we've seen more recently actually is the fact that wage rises are nowhere near keeping up pace with inflation. So I think that's actually causing the government, the Bank of England, to suggest that base rate rises are not necessarily appropriate right now. In fact, of the surveys we've done at IMLA, we did a broker survey, and a third of the brokers that we surveyed thought the base rate rise would be this year in 2014 in Q4. The rest were kind of leaning more towards early next year. And I must admit, in IMLA we're more in favour of very early January or perhaps the tail end of this year, but more likely into the start of next year.
Whenever the base rate does happen, it's obviously going to be a very small increase. I mean, what big an impact is that going to have, a tiny increase on the base rate?
I think what it does is it sends a message. And the really good news is what the Bank of England have signalled so far is it will be a gradual increase when it does come. So rather than being a shock to people's affordability overnight or a shock to the system, it'll be a gradual increase. It sends a message to say rates are moving up now, so make sure your affordability going forward accounts for that. So I think the trajectory and the statements made by the Bank of England are absolutely right to give some confidence to people that whilst they'll rise, it won't be a disaster scenario.
One thing we've not really seen in the financial crisis and the subsequent years is a massive spate of repossessions. Is that still to come? Are we going to see that once interest rates start to rise? I
think it's very unlikely. I think there's always going to be a gradual increase, and you would expect that in the cycle that we're going to go into. But definitely not a problem scenario. I mean, the key thing is, for many years actually, but even more so latterly, lenders have taken great care about affordability. And obviously the MMR, the Mortgage Market Review, has supplemented that. So I think the fact that people can afford base rate increases and mortgage rate increases is more likely to stand people in good stead going forward. But inevitably there'll be some tick up in arrears levels because we're at a very, very low point historically. But again, I see that as a natural progression but not a problem.
Now, a lot of areas of the country, people are still stuck in negative equity, house prices haven't quite rebounded. How's an interest rate rise going to affect those kind of people?
Well, I think it's exactly the same. So I think if you are in negative equity, if you can afford the mortgage, that's not a problem. It just means it restricts your ability to move for a period of time. So I think they're two very different things. I think the other thing we have seen in terms of house price inflation is most parts of the country now have experienced growth to different levels since the recession occurred. If you take London aside, obviously, which is almost like a different track, most parts of the UK are in single-digit house price inflation territory, and that's good news. So even the areas that have struggled a bit more are starting to see some pickup in growth, and I think that will give people confidence that negative equity, if you're in negative equity, it will improve over time.
How are the Bank of England's loan-to-income caps going to affect this?
Well, I think loan-to-income caps will make a marginal difference. I mean, don't forget, most lenders have various tests in place right now to make sure loans are affordable. I think what this does, it just gives a consistent approach across all the lender market. And I see it making a marginal difference to the amount of mortgages available. Not great, but it will make a small percentage difference to what is available in the market.
On the Help to Buy scheme, obviously it's helped a lot of people on the housing ladder, but we're talking about thousands here where the UK seems to have a bigger structural problem than that. What's the solution?
I think it's a couple of things. I think one of the big solutions is growing the housing supply. So there's a lot of initiatives on the go, but we've a long way to go. I mean, there's something like 200,000 households per annum forming, and just over 100,000 new houses being built over the last few years per annum. So we need to do a lot more in terms of encouraging growth of housing supply. In terms of Help to Buy itself, I mean, the good news is it would appear Help to Buy 1, the equity scheme, will continue till 2020, according to the government. The Help to Buy 2, the guarantee scheme, I think that will obviously last for a shorter period of time. Maybe next year, the year after, it'll probably either be curtailed or pulled altogether. The important thing for lenders is to make sure that we can continue lending at 95% loan to value. And if the lender appetite isn't quite there, we need to look at other mechanisms to try and support that. It could be mortgage indemnity guarantee, for example, which some building societies already use very successfully. So I don't think any subsequent withdrawal Help to Buy will cause a marked difference in the market, but what it will do is mean lenders have to rethink how they approach those first-time buyer propositions. But it will not, as far as we're concerned, derail the market in any shape or form.
Now, MMR's obviously had a little time now to bed in, and we've seen this swing towards the intermediary channel from a lot of lenders with their branches unable to cope, telephone staff also the same. By the end of the year, what sort of split will we be looking at in terms of the broker to direct share of the market?
Well, I think we were not long ago at about 50-50, and I think we're moving quite quickly at the moment into the sort of 60-40 territory in favour of the intermediary channel, and I think it will stay there for a while. I see ultimately about 70-30, so 70% intermediary, and I think that's because as the market grows, as affordability becomes even more the watchword in a way, I think a lot of borrowers, particularly as first-time buyers come back into the market more and more, will want full advice across the market, not just necessarily from one lender. But at the end of the day, it's horses for courses, and both are very robust channels. There's a good choice available for the consumer, which is what's important. But I do think the broker channel will grow over time. And I think 70-30 in a year or two's time feels about where it'll end up for me.
Thanks for your time, Charles, and thanks for watching this edition of Mortgage Solutions TV. Bye for now.